Castles are brilliant, aren't they? Today, I'm going to be talking about one of my favourites, the third that I'll talk about that belonged to the medieval earldom of Ulster in Ireland. And if I'm being honest, and with apologies to Carrickfergus and Dundrum, it's the one that I'd choose to live in if I were offered one for my own. Today, I'll be talking about King John's Castle in Carlingford. I'm Ruadh Butler, and I wrote novels about the 12th century Norman invasion of Ireland. I haven't quite got my books to the point where the Normans have made it as far as Louth, but hopefully I will in the future. And if you'd like to learn more about Strongbow, Robert Fitzstephen, Dermot and Aoife McMurrogh, and Raymond Le Gros, do check out the description where you'll find links to my book series. And thank you for doing that. There has always been, or there have always been, Gaelic villages in the vicinity of Carlingford on the Cooley Peninsula in what is now County Louth, and certainly since the Mesolithic period. And the geography says that it's always been an important point for crossing into Ulster, far easier, for instance, than chancing a journey through the mountains between Louth and Newry, or even then going further west into Cavan and the Lakelands and the associated problems there. And actually, this area of called the Cooley Peninsula was actually considered part of the northern province of Ulster for much of its history. With a fine natural harbour and easily defensible high rock promontory, it would seem the most obvious place in the world for the Gaels to build a fort, where the castle now stands in Carlingford town. Archaeologists have found a ditch which runs around the site and which was used in the foundations of the castle, accounting perhaps for the curved facade on the western side. In the 8th century AD, the area, like many other places in Ireland, became a target for roving bands of Vikings, and the destruction of a nearby monastery is recorded in 841. Also, a great sea battle was fought on Carlingford Lough in 852 between the Norse and Danish Vikings. And it is thought that one of the victorious Danish chieftains, Accold, may have given his name to the fort situated where the castle now is, after occupying the area. And it was at this stage called Dun Acola. I'm not sure if I buy into that one myself, but there we go. They, like everyone who followed them, realised that they could control all the shipping that was going in and out of the loch from this stronghold, making it a really important place to hold. The Vikings also renamed the sea loch, giving it the name Carlingfjordur, which means narrow sea inlet of the hag, or perhaps lake of the hag-shaped rock, or something to that effect. There is no trace of their habitation there, and the Scandinavian name was eventually adopted by the Irish as Carline Loch, or Carlingford Loch as we now know it. When the Anglo-Norman history of Carlingford began is a little difficult to pin down, but it was presumably soon after Hugh de Lacy was granted the lordship of Meath in 1171 by King Henry II. At some point around 1185, Prince John, or the Count John as he's sometimes known, who would later be King John, and who'd been made Lord of Ireland by his father, King Henry II. Well, this little prince, he granted the whole of that of northern Louth, including the Cooley Peninsula, to his knight, a friend of his called Bertram de Verdon. At that time, Prince John was worried that Hugh de Lacy was becoming overly powerful, and he really was, and probably believed that placing a loyal knight like Bertram on Hugh's northern border would limit expansion of Hugh's power in the future, and maybe even curtail him a little bit. But that's a story for another day. But if you'd like to hear more about the de Lacy dynasty in Ireland, do leave a comment and make sure that I know about it and I can do it again. Bertram de Verdon, this friend of Prince John, was probably based elsewhere in Louth rather than at Carlingford town. What we do know is that he founded a borough at Dundalk between 1186 and 1188. And there is no evidence of his even controlling the northern part of the Cooley Peninsula before his death in 1192. Where obviously now Carlingford town is founded. Bertram and his son Thomas did, however, build a series of motte and bailey castles across the southern shores of the Cooley Peninsula, so the rule probably extended that far at the very least. Hugh de Lacy's, this Lord of Meath, his second son, Hugh de Lacy the Younger, married as his first wife, Leslyn de Verdon, and as part of that marriage settlement, the claim to Carlingford town actually passed into his possession around 1195. And by 1202, the castle and the town walls were at the very least under construction. Hugh the Younger, that's Hugh de Lacy the Younger, was, despite his father's previous behaviour, a favourite of Prince John. And when John became King of England in 1199, he actually authorised Hugh the Younger to wage war on another independently minded Anglo-Norman lord in Ireland. As we know, John de Courcy had conquered eastern Ulster in 1177 and he'd ruled that land as a prince rather than a subject of the English crown. Although he was still granted several offices by the English crown, probably due to the power that he held. In any event, in 1204, Hugh the Younger captured John's two main castles at Dundrum and Carrickfergus as part of this waging of war against John de Courcy. Be sure to check out my videos about those two castles. I will put the links in the description as well. By 1207, Hugh, who was now considered Earl of Ulster, and his older brother, Walter de Lacy, the second Lord of Meath, had grown too powerful for John's liking, King John's liking. And in 1210, John actually launched an expedition to Ireland at the head of a large army. And this is the second time overmighty, or more than the second time, overmighty subjects of King had met with the ire of King John. It happened again and again and again. This was John's second adventure to Ireland. His first in 1185 had been an absolute disaster, but this proved, and uniquely in King John's career, it was a success. During his time in Ireland, he also marched through William Marshall's lordship of Leinster, bringing the so-called greatest knight to heel, and expelled William de Braose from Limerick. But his first target were the de Lacy brothers. Walter fled before his might, and John would hold the lordship of Meath directly for about 5 years until the circumstances changed, and John required Walter de Lacy's help. He was thus restored. After dealing with Walter de Lacy, John turned his attention towards Hugh de Lacy the Younger in July 1210. Reputedly, John led his army across Carlingford Loch at the narrow water on a pontoon bridge, floating on boats, as you can imagine, presumably after capturing Carlingford Castle, and thus avoiding the ever-dangerous Moyrie Pass in the mountains leading between Cooley Peninsula and what is now Newry. The king stayed in Carlingford Castle for a short period and paid for repairs to the town and the town walls. Apparently at this time, only the western portion of the present castle had been built, and so it's for this reason that we now call it King John's Castle. And although it is only one of several to bear this name in Ireland. Walter and Hugh de Lacy appear to have fled to Carrickfergus Castle just before Dundrum was captured by King John. And they didn't wait for Carrickfergus to fall either, taking a boat to Scotland before the end of July in 1210. Hugh would subsequently work his way to France, where he'd take part in the Albigensian Crusade, which is very deserves a video of its own, I think. King John would later divide Leinster into 12 shires to better administer his Irish lands. That is pretty much the lasting effect of this, other than the several castles that he founded. In 1222, that's over a decade later, Hugh the Younger returned to Ireland. His enemy, King John, having died back in 1216. Hugh allied himself with his family's traditional enemies, the O'Neills of Tyrone, and campaigned against the Anglo-Irish government in Dublin. Why would he do this? Well, it quickly became apparent to the government that it would be less disruptive to just give Hugh what he wanted, that is, his earldom back, rather than have him wrecking around in opposition to them. And in 1227, he was restored as Earl of Ulster and reclaimed Carlingford Castle. Between this and his death in 1242, Hugh actually added some projecting towers containing staircases to the curtain walls at Carlingford. He extended the Great Hall and rebuilt the Chamber Tower, which was the principal residential part of the castle. He would then, I think his principal fortress was still, even at this time, Carrickfergus, and that's where he died in 1242. Anyone who arrived in Carlingford from the sea would, of course, travel up part of Carlingford Loch and would be presented with a very daunting face of a castle. Access to the castle was via the sea gate, which was protected by defences directly above it. Evidence of the castle bailey, which was to the west of the castle, has disappeared. But that would have contained granaries, storehouses, what else? Barns, workshops, like accommodation for soldiers, maybe the lowlier soldiers, and other buildings required for the survival of a castle. A defensible gate would have provided access between the bailey, as it would have been called, and the castle proper that we can still see today. So Hugh de Lacy the Younger actually had no legitimate children, but his daughter Maud had married her cousin Walter de Burgh, who was the Lord of Connaught, and he was actually created Earl of Ulster in right of this marriage in 1264. In 1271, the earldom actually passed in Maud's stepson, Richard Og de Burgh, Walter's son by his first wife, and it was under the second Earl of Ulster, Richard de Burgh, that Carlingford continued to develop. He was actually a patron of the Dominican Friary, which I also visited, which is dedicated to St. Malachy, which was founded in about 1305 and still stands within sight of Holy Trinity Church, which was established during the 13th century and still has medieval elements, such as the tower in the south wall, that you can visit today. The friary was sacked by the Scots army under Edward Bruce, the younger brother of the King of Scotland, Robert Bruce, in 1316. But there is no evidence that King John's Castle ever fell to the invaders at this time. I might have to do a video about the Bruce invasion because it's a brilliant time. I'll maybe see if I can get Tim Hodgkinson on to give me a hand with that. In 1326, Edward II, King Edward II, granted the charter to Carlingford to levy a mirage for the building of a town wall. Only a small fragment survives in the town today, and it had an external ditch which helped strengthen its defences. Town walls were not only used as a means of defence, of course, they also served as a customs barrier to ensure that goods entering the town did so via the town gates, which was where the taxes were levied on the goods coming in. The North Gate was one of 4 town gates and gave access to Castle Hill Street, and then down through the town past Taft's Castle and the Thulsel, which is the local administrative building where tolls and taxes were collected. And I suspect trade was the hub for trade in the town. Holy Trinity Church and the Dominican Friary stood just outside the town walls, beyond the Thulsel Gate, which is the only remaining medieval gates to Carlingford. This was actually used as a town jail in the 18th century and was originally 3 stories high. I'll post a picture here of what it looks like today. It is absolutely glorious. We'll walk through it to the church and the friary, and very much worth a visit. The Earls of Ulster, let's talk about them. So the murder of the 3rd Earl of Ulster happened in 1333, and upon his death, by members of his own family, I should add, he was killed by members of his own extended family. But after his death, his lands and titles were inherited by the Duke of Clarence, who had married his daughter. The Duke of Clarence, of course, was the second son of King Edward III. And these lands then passed through a couple of heiresses to the Mortimer Earls of March, or the Earls of March and Ulster, they should be, to the Dukes of York. They were, of course, a junior branch of the royal family, of the Plantagenet dynasty, and they went to war against King Henry VI in the 1450s in a conflict now known as the Wars of Roses. So the head of the York family, the Dukes of York, actually became King Edward IV in 1460. And in 1467, he granted the rights to mint coinage at Carlingford. There is a 15th century fortified townhouse beside the Thulsel in Carlingford town, which is known as the Mint. But as far as I know, there's no evidence that it was ever used for that purpose. And it seems more likely that it might just have been a home of a leading town merchant or something to that effect. Probably thanks in part to this link to the royal family, Carlingford remained an important trading port during the 14th, 15th, and early 16th centuries. And many families actually had houses around the harbour, these merchant families. The Taft family, that's T-A-A-F-E, were one of the leading merchant families, and their house, it's now called Taft's Castle, is also still standing, although it was undergoing repairs the day that I was in town. And the family became so wealthy that they were actually made Earls of Carlingford in 1661, before they went off into exile in Austria after the Battle of the Boyne in 1690. And they actually became noblemen over in the Holy Roman Empire as well, became counts in Bohemia. The Taaffe family, as we know, fought against Prince William III of Orange at the Boyne in 1690. And it was said that after the battle, he actually housed his wounded soldiers in King John's Castle in Carlingford, which I don't know if that would be comfortable or safe, but it was certainly a dramatic backdrop if you're a wounded soldier who's just come the whole way from outside Drogheda. King John's Castle itself was still in the ownership of the English crown at this time, but it was already considered to be in a wretched condition in the mid-1500s. And in 1552, King Edward VI, that's the son of King Henry VIII, he actually granted it to an English soldier called Sir Nicholas Bagenal, who was also appointed Marshal of Ireland. He repaired it as a strategic defence at the northernmost point of the Pale, which is obviously the area around Dublin, directly under the control of the government. But really, I think the Bagenals were most closely associated with Newry Town, which is on the other side of the Carlingford Loch. The last remaining of the 4 town gates into Carlingford, and one of the few that are remaining in Ireland, it stands at the entrance to Thulsel Street. It's contemporary with the 15th century town walls, and as I say, it functioned as a toll gate where taxes were levied on goods. It's recorded in 1834 that the building was used by the Corporation of Carlingford for meetings, and a parliament is said to be convened there. And, you know, that's pretty impressive in itself. However, by the 1700s, the castle was abandoned and soon fell to ruin. Most recently, it has undergone a careful like a renovation by the Office of Public Works to make it accessible to the public. Unfortunately, it wasn't when I arrived there because of COVID reasons, which is completely understanding. But my goodness, it is such a wonderful place to visit. And I don't just mean the castle. We spent the day in Carlingford and thoroughly enjoyed the town and the whole of the Cooley Peninsula. So take my advice, and if you're in Ireland, build a visit to Carlingford into your trip, and come and see the medieval King John's Castle in Carlingford. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Do leave a comment if you have any thoughts about future videos, and please feel free to share this video with your pals. I'm Ruadh Butler. Do check out my books down in the description, and we'll see you next time for a bit more Irish history. Cheerio.